So as you might guess, I'm here to talk about the publisher perspective and experience counter. And like Wayne, I wanted to think back to what things were like before counter. Now, he had kind of the frontier experience. I think mine was a little more urban. But we started with a counter. It worked for a while. Then we had more library customers. But even then, it wasn't totally the Wild West. There were some rules. Basically, we had to have a code of practice in what we were doing. And audits, we came and checked out those abacus machines, and then things, got modern. So it's a busy publisher, a lot going on. So 2002, leading into 2003, Peter really talked about that getting started, but this was a really important move to bring people together. And there was a lot of just disagreement, a lot of confusion. What were the numbers? Were they comparable? What were we looking at? So it's good for publishers. So the standards. The fact that there's something that we can build to with reporting instead of doing lots of different things, the broad acceptance, knowledge, and adaptability. So we'll go into a little more. So standards, one specification, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel all the time. And as you know, as publishers, it is very expensive in time and money to do that. Content hosts support standard reporting. So if you're at Highwire, Adapon, Silverchair, any of the other hosting services that are out there, if you are using standard counter reports, that's part of the package. So, Counter has always said, publishers, you can also provide additional reports if you want. The fact is, you then go to your hosting service and say additional reports that, okay, well, that's $40,000 and maybe 6 months from now. And it gets to the point where even if you wanted them, you didn't necessarily get them. And then as we're looking at the numbers, it's apples to apples, sort of. Not really, but it got us in a playing field where directionally it is useful. Broad acceptance, we've talked about the publishers, librarians, aggregators, content hosts. It's important that all these players have been in here. Knowledge. So for librarians, clearly it's useful. How much usage is there in my community? It certainly helps them with collection development decisions. It's not the total package, but it gives you something. Publishers, because it becomes important as well. What's the usage by customer? What's usage by that community as we're working there? And it helps inform the business decisions that we're going to make. So I think probably maybe the best and most important piece of why Counter has been successful, in my opinion, is that it has been adaptable moving forward. So just to get the original reporting needs and Counter Code of Practice 1 into place, there was a lot of work to make sure that that was working exactly the way we wanted. There was some early research into it. Phil Davis, who may or may not acknowledge his presence in the room, and Jason Price did some really good research looking at some of the disparity of those numbers and helped to find, maybe not find out, but put a spotlight on the idea that the design of the eJournal interface had huge impact on what those numbers looked like. I couldn't find a visual of this in the time that I looked at it, but does everybody remember when you went to the website and you read the article and say, I want to see the PDF of this article? And you clicked on it, and the next screen said, do you really want the PDF of this article? Click here. That was 2 page views. So, those were the kind of things that were happening at the time. There wasn't anything nefarious about it when it was designed that way, but at the time, that was considered. Well, we're publishers, we're trying to figure out how to go from print to online. How do we do this? How do we make sure they wanted to go to PDF? But it didn't work. And just from a user experience, we got past that. But from a reporting experience, we had to get past that right away. Also the issue of if I double click by accident, is that one request, two requests, those types of things. Now, as you all know, online publishing continues to evolve, both in the types of services that you're building online, the tools that are being used online, going from kind of pure HTML into some AJAX code and page tags, and things look very different on your website. And what I think has really worked for Counter is that now it's in release 4. It continues to say these are the things that we need to be counting as we move forward. So I'm not going to go through the list of everything that Peter talked about, but just a few of the examples that I noticed looking at it. Having one integrated code of practice for journals and books and reference works, I think, is really important, especially for publishers that are doing multiple products. Expanded content definitions. Very important. Usage by year of publication. I get asked a lot about that from librarians. Can we kind of figure out how much is current material that's being used? Multimedia. That's something, Peter talked a little bit about the balance of stability and moving forward in the code. I actually talked to Peter about 3 years ago about we've got to be able to count multimedia. And it took a few years for it to come into the code, but it made more sense when we had this discussion about, the counter code of practice is not going to be at the leading edge. It's going to be what's kind of being generally used and counted, and it becomes informed by the leading edge, but it moves along over time. Mobile access, that's becoming more and more important. And again, both the access through mobile browsers and mobile apps as they're available. Certainly the gold open access is a big issue for a lot. And again, this log files versus page tags, it's kind of kind of that in that geeky code of how we're actually building these pages, but if you're looking at reports that are based on log files versus reports that are based on page tags that have been set up, they can be different. So being able to understand that and the fact that the code of practice is starting to address those types of issues, I think, are very positive. In terms of the future, I think, we're looking at continually evolving this. I'm sure Peter doesn't want to do it anytime soon, but there will be a Counter 5. One can imagine some of the things that might, be in Counter 5. I get asked, so of these usage statistics, how much of those is text mining, and you think? Well, it'd be good to know, wouldn't it? How much of that is user commentary that came from my institution about your content on your site? That's also pretty interesting. Those are things I would love to have in a custom report today, not going to have, but I think as over time, those are the types of issues, and there'll be more that will evolve. The usage factor and Pyrus that Peter talked about, I think they're both great projects. Again, they're not like Counter, like the impact factor. They're not absolute, never claim to be absolute, but I think directionally they give us more information, and the more information that we have, we can all make better decisions. But again, you need to kind of keep everything in perspective. Does anybody know the cat's name? Oscar. This is Oscar the cat. Oscar is at a nursing home down in Rhode Island. And it turns out that Oscar is really good at knowing which nursing home resident is not going to be with us for much longer. And what was found was that it had this great ability to go and start cuddling, hugging with someone at the nursing home, and almost inevitably within a few days they had passed along. So it was kind of an interesting story. We actually did a little piece about it in New England Journal of Medicine in July of 2007. We thought it was interesting too. The really interesting part is that this is one of the most popular articles of downloads we have ever had. Okay. So if, I would, a whole other subject, I would recommend that publishers never have metered usage-based pricing, which is a whole other talk. But one of the reasons would be the librarian says, okay, go deduct Oscar, and then we'll come back and talk, right? Because the numbers are different. So just, these are not absolute numbers. You need to kind of keep some context about what's going there. So my takeaway messages for you: Counter works. It's 10 years now. It's working well. I asked someone in senior management of one of the leading content aggregators the other day, so what are you thinking about Counter these days? He said, a few years ago we talked about it all the time. Hardly ever talk about it at all now. But what that really meant in this context was it works. He doesn't have to worry about it. It's in place. It's not something that senior management worries about because it's there, it's accepted, the code gets updated, the tech people go in and update everything. So I think that was really a sign of a success story. I really urge you to support and implement Counter the best you can, and understand the data in context. I'm not everyone certainly knows that sometimes facts, you don't want to let facts get in the way of a good story. I guess I would just, as a personal note, suggest that you at least know what they mean, and if you choose to use them in other ways, that's fine. But I think too many times you get people saying, well, this number says this, and it's because they're really not quite sure what that number means. So, thank you.
We'll hold questions to the end.